In 1739, arrived among us from Ireland the Reverend Mr. Whitfield, who'd made himself remarkable there as an itinerant preacher. He was at first permitted to preach in some of our churches, but the clergy, taking a dislike to him, soon refused him their pulpits, and he was obliged to preach in the fields. The multitudes of all sects and denominations that attended his sermons was enormous. It was wonderful to see the change soon made in the manners of our inhabitants. From being thoughtless or indifferent about religion, it seemed as if all the world were growing religious.
This was how Benjamin Franklin described the religious fervor known as the Great Awakening, which spread through the American colonies in the 1740s. The Anglican priest George Whitfield, mentioned by Franklin, traveled through New Jersey, preaching in such places as Old Tennant's Church outside of Freehold. During the first half of the 18th century, religious turmoil was accompanied by social and political conflict. It was a time of royal rule and religious revival. Despite the political unification of the former provinces of East and West Jersey into a single royal colony, New Jersey continued to be divided in many ways. New Jersey had two capitals, one in Burlington and one in Perth Amboy. The colony was deeply divided by disputes over land ownership and rivalries between religious and ethnic groups. In addition, New Jersey shared its governor with New York.
In 1702, when the proprietors of East and West New Jersey surrendered their charters to the Crown, a new era began in the political history of New Jersey. The source of all governmental authority passed from the inept hands of the proprietors to the ponderous bureaucracy in England. It was unfortunate that the new regime was inaugurated by a royal governor who lacked almost every qualification for coping with the political tensions that carried over from the proprietary period.
Despite his instructions not to take sides in the disputes dividing New Jerseyans, Lord Cornbury promptly allied himself with the Anglicans against the Quakers. In May 1707, the New Jersey Assembly petitioned the Queen to remove Cornbury from office.
The charges against Cornbury were that he misappropriated funds, accepted bribes, and appeared publicly in women's clothes.
Governor Cornbury's real crime was that he was a staunch imperialist who favored the Church of England and believed that Americans should subordinate their provincial interests to the glory of the British Empire.
Legend says that Cornbury sat for this portrait dressed in women's clothes to show how closely he resembled his cousin Queen Anne. However, Cornbury's name was not attached to the portrait until almost 75 years after his death, making the attribution highly questionable.
Cornbury's opponents not only wanted him recalled, they wanted New Jersey to have its own governor. They got one of their wishes in 1708, when Lord Cornbury was removed from office. For the other, they would have to wait.
Between 1702 and 1738, New Jersey continued to share its royal governor with New York. The royal appointees tended to spend the greater part of their time in New York, with the result that public affairs in New Jersey suffered from neglect. Lewis Morris, who was a prominent member of the East Jersey Board of Proprietors, was responsible for securing a separate governor for New Jersey.
Morris had inherited a large estate in East Jersey, including an ironworks at Tinton Falls in Monmouth County, where more than 60 African-American slaves worked. He was probably the largest slave owner in New York and New Jersey, perhaps in North America, before 1700. Morris had served as the Chief Justice of the New York Supreme Court until New York's Governor William Cosby dismissed him from office because he voted against Cosby in a case involving the governor's salary. Morris's cause was taken up by a young newspaper editor named John Peter Zenger. Cosby had Zenger arrested for libel. Zenger was acquitted, and the Zenger case was hailed as a milestone in the development of the freedom of the press in America. Morris then went to England to attempt to remove Cosby from office. Instead, Prime Minister Sir Robert Walpole in 1738 appointed Morris the governor of New Jersey. And so New Jersey received its first separate royal governor as a consolation prize to Lewis Morris. Although New Jersey had a governor who could devote his attention exclusively to the affairs of the colony, there continued to be a dispute over the old boundary between East and West Jersey, delineated in 1676 in the deed that divided the two former colonies.
The boundary described in the deed was to be a straight line between the northwest point of the former province of New Jersey and a point here on the east side of Little Egg Harbor.
The 1664 grant from the Duke of York to Berkeley and Carteret had fixed the northwest corner of New Jersey at a branch of the Delaware River located at 41 degrees 40 minutes latitude. However, there is no branch of the Delaware River at that latitude, an inaccuracy that probably resulted from their reliance on an old Dutch map of the region. When the Quaker George Keith surveyed the boundary between East and West Jersey in 1687, he ran his line from Little Egg Harbor to the south branch of the Raritan River at Three Bridges. But in 1719, the legislatures of New York and New Jersey appointed a commission that confirmed the original northwest station point at 4140. However, it wasn't until 1743 that funds were raised to hire John Lawrence to survey a new line between Little Egg Harbor and this point on the Delaware River.
The survey was already a central provocation in the early 1730s. People feared that when the boundary line between East and West Jersey was surveyed, that the land was going to go to the proprietors.
The Lawrence line gained acceptance by both sets of proprietors over the Keith line. As you can see from a map, the Lawrence line shifted the boundary a considerable distance, adding nearly 500,000 acres to West Jersey at the expense of East Jersey and resulting in the same land being sold twice. The unrest concerning the boundary line was only one episode in a long-term struggle over land titles. The proprietors and their supporters claimed their land under royal charter, while the other group, which derived its leadership and power from the towns of East Jersey, claimed their land by Indian purchase or squatting.
The spark which set off a violent conflict came in September 1745 when a man named Samuel Baldwin was cutting wood near here in the Horseneck area of Essex County on land which he claimed as his own, but which the proprietors also claimed.
Baldwin was arrested by the sheriff for trespass, brought down to Newark, and put in the jail. His neighbors, fearful that this was the beginning of their also being ejected from their lands, came down to Newark armed with clubs, and they got Baldwin out of jail. In January of 1746, 3 men were arrested for the September jailbreak, and another huge crowd assembled.
We have just now received the following account of a very extraordinary riot at Newark on Thursday last. A great number of persons appeared, armed with cudgels, coming down from the back settlements. In the afternoon, the mob, being increased to about 300 strong, marched with the utmost intrepidity to the prison, which they broke open, setting at liberty all the prisoners they could find, as well debtors as others, and then marched off in triumph.
Some of the rioters reached out beyond the boundaries of race and tried to enlist local Indians in their cause. As early as the first riot at Newark in 1745, there was mention of the Indians as allies of the anti-proprietor forces. Since many of the rioters were claiming land under Indian titles, it seems plausible that the Indians would take an interest in a struggle which involved their right to the land.
The rioters drew heavily on religious language to define their cause. Several of their petitions and pamphlets drew directly on the sermons of revivalist preachers in order to defend their actions.
This was no accident. At the same time, the land riots were disrupting New Jersey society. The Great Awakening swept through the American colonies.
The Great Awakening created conditions uniquely favorable to social and political as well as religious reform. Before it subsided, the revival had unsettled the lives of more Americans and disrupted more institutions than any other single event in colonial experience to that time.
In New Jersey, the Great Awakening was led by 2 men, the Dutch Reform minister Theodorus Jacobus Frelinghuysen and the Presbyterian pastor Gilbert Tennant. Both had congregations in New Brunswick. Frelinghuysen came to New Jersey in 1720 to serve several Dutch congregations in the Raritan Valley. Like his more famous counterpart, Jonathan Edwards, Frelinghuysen's preaching style appealed to the emotions. The intent was to convince the listener that he or she was a sinner in need of a personal conversion experience.
The almighty power of him who removeth the mountains, who shaketh the earth so that the pillars thereof tremble, should fill with terror you openly ungodly, as adulterers, whoremongers, drunkards, misers, dishonest persons, all in whom the works of the flesh are manifest. Remaining uncovered, you shall be cast into the lake of fire and brimstone.
Frelinghuysen was soon joined by Gilbert Tennant, who came to New Brunswick in 1726 to start a Presbyterian meeting. Tennant adopted Frelinghuysen's style. When George Whitefield came to New Brunswick, he met Reverend Tennant, who accompanied Whitefield in his travels around New York and New Jersey.
Left Trenton about 6 in the morning. Had a sweet and pleasant journey. And reached New Brunswick about 30 miles distant, about 1 o'clock. Here we were much refreshed with the company of Mr. Gilbert Tennant, an eminent dissenting minister about 40 years of age. God, I find, has been pleased greatly to bless his labors. He and his associates are now the burning and shining lights of this part of America.
The Great Awakening brought about a major realignment in American society. It involved people from different religious denominations and ethnic groups in a common movement. but it also divided denominations and even congregations into those who advocated an emotional religion and challenged traditional religious authority, versus those who favored a more rational religion and relied on traditional authority. The Revivalists wanted ministers trained at their own seminaries. Princeton and Rutgers universities were founded to meet this need.
The College of New Jersey, as Princeton University was originally known, was the logical outgrowth of the efforts of the Tennant family to train in evangelical ministry, mostly for the Middle Atlantic colonies. Its first president was Jonathan Dickinson, a New Englander from Long Island. He began classes in the parsonage of the First Presbyterian Church in Elizabeth, but he died of pleurisy only 5 months later. His successor was Reverend Aaron Burr Sr., the father of the Aaron Burr who became Vice President of the United States. The college was moved to his parsonage in Newark. In 1756, the college was moved to the town of Princeton, into Nassau Hall, which at that time was the largest building in the British mainland colonies.
The Dutch Reformed Church was a national church, appealing strongly to every Dutch descendant in America. Its greatest handicap lay in the requirement that ministerial candidates obtain their training in Holland.
The Reverend Theodore Frelinghuysen, son of Theodorus Jacobus, rallied the ministers and congregations behind the call for a Dutch college. Petitions were addressed to successive governors of New Jersey without success.
Finally, in November 1766, Governor William Franklin granted a charter for Queens College, which is today Rutgers University.
The Great Awakening had other implications as well.
In the colonies as a whole, there was a high correlation between the people who supported the Awakening and those who later became patriots. In New Jersey, the link between revivalism and revolution was even stronger. Without this push from the Awakeners, I doubt that New Jersey would have gone revolutionary.
The Revivalists reached out to other people than those of European ancestry. For African Americans and Native Americans, the Great Awakening hastened their adoption of European Christianity.
Slaves and free blacks were converted to Christianity in increasing numbers during the Great Awakening. Although some slaves were married in Christian ceremonies, these unions were not protected from the abuses of the slave system. The greatest threat to black family life was the colonial slave trade. Families rarely remained together when slaves were sold. Many slaves attempted to escape from their owners or used deceit and various forms of rebellion as responses to a life of perpetual bondage. During the so-called Negro Conspiracy in New York in 1741, fearful whites in New Jersey meted out swift and harsh punishment to those suspected of complicity in the scheme. 2 blacks accused of setting fire to barns in Bergen County were burned at the stake here in Hackensack.
The Great Awakening did not alter the fundamental circumstances of African Americans. For Native Americans, it had the negative effect of further divorcing them from their traditional culture.
In 1745, about 20 Lenape families gathered here at Crosswicks, near Trenton, to hear a young Presbyterian missionary named David Brainerd.
Brainerd moved his congregation in the spring of 1746 to a more suitable piece of land near Cranberry, where they settled a town that he gave the biblical name Bethel.
Backed by the Society for the Propagation of Christian Knowledge, Brainerd sought to convert the Indians not only to his religion, but also to the European way of life.
Admiration for white culture undoubtedly prompted many a Delaware to accept the Christian religion. But taking over the white man's religion was merely taking over the white man's shadow. A Delaware Indian named Tediosgung tried to bridge the cleft between the two worlds and died an alien to both. Tediosgung was born about 1700 east of Trenton. His family eked out an existence making baskets and brooms on the shabby fringes of the white settlements, simultaneously dependent upon and resentful of the whites. By 1730, the family had crossed the Delaware River and entered the province of Pennsylvania in the neighborhood of the Lehigh River, where Tediosgung was baptized as a Christian. Although Tediosgung later broke with white men, his short association with them gave a permanent moralizing cast to his thought.
The French and Indian War erupted in 1754. It was the last in a series of conflicts between Britain and France for control of North America.
At first, Tediosgung seems to have stood neutral, with sympathies tending toward the English. However, eventually he joined the faction which wanted a war against the English. He delivered an eloquent speech indicting whites for stealing land from the Indians at a conference in November 1756, held there in eastern Pennsylvania.
This very ground that is under me was my land and inheritance, and is taken from me by fraud. I've not only been served so in this government, but the same thing has been done to me as to several tracts in New Jersey over the river. When I have sold lands fairly, I look upon them to be really sold. A bargain is a bargain. Though I have sometimes had nothing for the lands I have sold but broken pipes or such trifles, yet I think I should not be ill-used on this account by those very people who have had such an advantage in their purchases, nor to be called a fool for it. Indians are not such fools as to bear this in their minds.
The Lenape Indians from the Susquehanna Valley and their allies raided Sussex County. These raids frightened white settlers, making them suspicious of the few remaining Lenape living among them.
In 1758, the government purchased a tract of land for the Indians' exclusive use here in Burlington County at a place today known as Indian Mills. In exchange, 5 leaders of the southern New Jersey Lenape agreed to give up their claims to properties south of the Raritan River.
By 1759, almost 2/3 of New Jersey's approximately 300 Indians had moved to the Brotherton Reservation. Here they established a sawmill to provide timber for their own use and to raise a little income.
The Brotherton Indians held on to the reservation until 1801, when they voted to divide the land into tracts to be sold by the state of New Jersey, with the profits going to the Indians. They then left New Jersey to join another group of Christian Indians in New Stockbridge, New York.
The period of royal rule was characterized by unity and disunity. 2 New Jerseys had been united as a single royal colony with its own governor. But New Jersey remained a society divided against itself. Land rioters against proprietors, Indians and blacks against whites, religious revivalists against orthodox religionists. The stage was set for the coming of the American Revolution.